This week on Weekend Spin, Black Sabbath will release Never Say Die, their last album with the original lineup, but that won't stop them from exploring new musical territory. Hello, this is TJR, and if this is your first time here, welcome to the channel. If not, welcome back. Released in 1978, Never Say Die is the 8th studio album by Black Sabbath and the last to feature the original lineup. The road to recording and releasing Never Say Die was a road filled with obstacles, conflict, and adversity. So much so that the band members themselves looked at the album's title as a bit of an in-joke. At this time, drug and alcohol abuse had taken its toll on each band member. Lead singer Ozzy Osbourne's father had passed away. And at one point, Ozzy Osbourne, who believed that the band had grown stale, briefly left the band and was replaced by former Save Brown and Fleetwood Mac vocalist Dave Walker. Not to mention the fact that on their last tour, the band was having their asses handed to them by their opening act, a little band from Los Angeles, California, called Van Halen. Of course, when I first listened to this album for the first time, I had no clue about any of this. But make no mistake when I tell you that Never Say Die was a polarizing listen for me. Featuring 9 tracks in total, I loved the opening title track that started side 1, and I pretty much dismissed the rest of side 1 as unlistenable. On side 2, I had the reverse experience. I disliked the side 2 opener entitled Shockwave, but loved the rest. Back then, I put track 1, side 1, Never Say Die, next to side 2's Air Dance, Over to You, Breakout, and Swinging the Chain to make this basically a one-sided album for me. And I loved that side. But for decades, that was my opinion of the album. However, recently, I have begun to re-listen and reevaluate this album. And I've come away with a much more positive opinion than I had previously. Now, before we dive into the actual tracks themselves, I want to preface that I now understand why I didn't like the remaining 4 tracks of side 1. I really do think now that a lot of it came down to the recording process. But let's discuss the tracks, and I'll talk about the recording process as we go. Track 1, Never Say Die. This album opens with a bang. And with this song, Black Sabbath manages to create an uplifting metal anthem. A lot of this track's upbeat mood and tone can be attributed to the song's ascending structure of power chords. What we have is an A major to B major to D major and then back to A major. The trick is in the timing. The first chord, the A, hits pretty much on the beat, but the other chords are just slightly ahead of the beat. The song's lyrics, which I'm going to assume come mostly from Geezer Butler, if not all, are not filled with sweetness and saccharin. They recognize that life is filled with trials, but that it is all worth it. Or as the saying goes, it's a good life if you don't weaken. When I hear this song, it makes me feel like I am a superhero, crashing through the walls of self-doubt and negativity, and it never fails to lift my mood. And this is all in spite of Ozzy Osbourne's professed disenchantment during the recording of the album. On this song, Tony Iommi delivers a very tight and effective guitar solo, and the retro 50s doo-wop vocal at the end is a nice throwback and also completely unexpected, but in a good way. Track 2, Johnny Blade. So I think the biggest problem with the rest of side 1 stemmed from the recording and mixing process. In interviews, guitarist Tony Iommi stated that the recording studio that they used, called Sounds Interchange Studios in Toronto, Canada, was booked based on a brochure, sight unseen. None of them had ever set foot in it. And when they got there, they discovered that it not only was just freezing cold, but that it also had just a dead sound when it came to live recording. In Sounds Weekly, Tony Iommi stated, "So what we had to do was rip the carpet up and try to make it as live as we could. They were okay about it, but it took time to get it exactly right. There were no other studios available." In my opinion, these difficulties with the studio created what I would describe as an ear-fatiguing harshness to some of the recorded tracks on this album. But I digress. The neoclassical organ solo that opens Johnny Blade sounds like something out of a fever dream. It is chaotic, it is psychotic, it sounds like something from a lost 60s Hammer horror film. But it is the guitar and synthesizer interplay throughout the rest of the song that I think really lifts it up to a more cinematic level, making it feel like something out of a lost dystopian future sci-fi movie. Add a little more keyboard or string production, and Johnny Blade could have easily felt more like a song by Queen versus a song by Black Sabbath. Again, I think the main thing holding back this track is its mix. Track 3, Junior's Eyes. So first, I really like the slow burning bass and drums opening. This is a great groove. It goes on for a good 30 seconds before Tony Iommi's guitar breaks in with this really scathing and dark guitar wah tone. This is basically Black Sabbath doing their version of the blues. The lyrics are about a child whose father dies and him trying to live with it, but being unable to cope. These lyrics are really very, very good. So it's a shame that they come off as mostly undecipherable in this recording. And there are going to be other recordings that I'm going to talk about where we have a similar effect. I'm not sure why this is. Perhaps Ozzy's vocal delivery and or his lack of enthusiasm about the album's production played a part in it. But more than that, I think it comes down to the actual recording and to the mix, and you're going to hear me talk about that more. On this track, I can hear the vocal melody fine, but the actual lyrics don't stand out, and I had to pull the lyrics off the internet in order to really appreciate them since they weren't included on the album's actual packaging. Tony Iommi's lead guitar solo doesn't sound quite as buried as it does on some of side 1's other tracks. That's another problem. It is a bit of an improvement, but not much. And again, it's a shame because it's a really good guitar solo. In fact, on just this track alone, there are a number of really cool guitar textures that move in and out of this track. But again, I think it's just not mixed very well. And a lot of this gets lost unless you really listen carefully. Track 4, Hard Road. It's hard for me to concede that at one point I really didn't care for this track. I mean, yeah, it has a few rough spots, but overall it features a very strong core guitar riff from Tony Iommi, along with strong interplay between bassist Geezer Butler and drummer Bill Ward. Again, Geezer Butler turns in some very strong lyrics about the hard realities of life on the road. Ozzy's vocal melody is mostly solid, but it's the chorus melody that really shines on this one, especially the gang vocal at the end. Again, just like the previous track, I feel that most of the problems with this recording all come down to the mix and how it was recorded. It feels rushed, and maybe a bit too awash in maybe a little too much reverb. And nowhere is this problem more evident than when trying to decipher the lyrics. Again, some of it might be Ozzy's delivery, but I keep thinking it's the muddiness of the mix and the problems Tony Iommi faced with the sound of the room. But in spite of these complaints, side one now works for me in its entirety in a way that it didn't previously. I can better see now what they were going for. This brings us to side two, track 5, entitled Shockwave. So I will start by saying that in spite of my new appreciation for side one, I still do not care for track 5 on this album. The most that I can say is that it has a nice bridge, but other than that, this is the weakest track on the album, but now it's the only track that I skip. This brings us to the final 4 tracks of the album, which I think is the album's strongest suit. And we start with track 6, entitled Air Dance. In interviews, Ozzy Osbourne complained that tracks like Air Dance and Breakout sounded too jazz-like or too much like the band was trying to sound like Pink Floyd. But honestly, I think these tracks were the real high point for this band. Air Dance opens with a brief, aggressive guitar intro from Tony Iommi. Minor quibble, I think this introduction could have been shortened by maybe 1 or 2 measures, but it's a minor quibble. After which, we are treated to a very beautiful and dream-like piano riff performed by Don Airey, hopefully I've said his name right, that is expertly accented by Butler and Ward's bass and drums. Not to mention also some great guitar and piano interplay that features tastefully smooth and inspired solos by Iommi and again Don Airey, who is the only credited keyboardist on the album, and who would go on to play keyboards for Deep Purple. This song closes with a very unexpected but very welcome jazz-style breakdown. I view this as Black Sabbath defying expectations and playing with progressive rock, and I applaud them for doing it. Track 7, Over to You. This one stands right up there with Air Dance as one of the album's high points. First, there is the very solid, heavy guitar riff that opens the track that feels very inspired by The Who. Just like with the album's title track, Tony Iommi plays a very uplifting chord riff, which is accented by the church organ performed by Airey. But the real secret weapon in this track is the contrast between Tony Iommi's heavy guitar riffing and Don Airey's luxurious piano fills during the chorus of the song. Then, of course, there are the great lyrics by Geezer Butler, which sadly, like so many of the tracks on this album, seem to get lost in the mix. Again, I can hear the vocal melody, and it's great, but I have trouble making out the lyrics without a lyric sheet. Track 8, Breakout. I'll tell you, the band was ahead of their time with this track. I describe this recording as dark jazz or doom jazz. This is a great instrumental that lends itself to the next track that it's going to lead into. And a little side note, when one of my old bands, Project True, was working on their third album entitled Get Out and Push, we had a track entitled Not Hopeless. And we were trying to figure out what to do during these little breaks in the song. And I pointed to this track, Breakout by Black Sabbath, and used it as inspiration on how the horns should play that part. I'm going to play you an A to B comparison, but first, I want to just play the chorus of the Project True song, Not Hopeless, so that you understand that these songs are completely different from each other. And now here's the A to B comparison. This is an example of how nothing gets created in a vacuum, and all art is inspired by what came before. Breakout transitions into track 9, Swinging the Chain.
It's against my uniform to be a civil judge.
This track features Bill Ward on vocals. He did the vocals presumably because Ozzy didn't want to. And I have to be honest, I think Bill Ward does a great job. At the 1 minute and 22 second mark, Ward delivers the line, "There must be some way out of here," with a very high falsetto voice. And I swear it feels like some kind of effect was added to the vocal to give it a more eerie feel.
There must be some way out of here, a compromise that's right.
Let me know if you hear this too when you listen to it the next time, and what you think that effect might be. And while we're on the topic of vocals, I should add that the lyrics on this track, sung by Ward, oftentimes feel as indecipherable as some of the other tracks that have Ozzy. And this leads me more inclined to lean towards the theory that it's the muddiness of the mix that creates this versus, who's singing it. Now, while the guitar riff on this particular track might not be as strong as some of the others on the album, it is the vocal melody that carries this one, and there is also some very excellent use of harmonica on this song as well. And it's musician John Elstor who performs the harmonica on Swinging the Chain. Swinging the Chain abruptly changes tempo at the 2 minute and 48 second minute mark. It's jarring, but it works for me. It also suddenly becomes a bit meaner and aggressive in the process, and the blues-style harmonica fits perfectly. All in all, I would say that yes, there are some tracks on the album that have their rough spots. But Never Say Die sees Black Sabbath experimenting and delving into sonic territory that they previously had not explored. And honestly, I found it exhilarating to hear them do this. And it's a shame that this was met with criticism versus praise. Now, not long ago, the album Technical Ecstasy got a Steven Wilson remix. I gained a new appreciation for Technical Ecstasy after hearing his remix. And if there is one other Sabbath album, if I could just choose only one that I think would benefit from a remix, it is Never Say Die. And naturally, of course, I think that Steven Wilson should be the one to do it. I only own this album on CD. I did once own it on vinyl, but I didn't feel I was getting anything more out of it than I was with the CD copy. This is from the recent reissue series that was done in Digipack packaging, and it included enhanced booklets with additional never-before-seen liner notes and memorabilia. There was no new remastering for this reissue, as a remastering had already been done a few years prior. One wasn't needed. It's a risky thing when a band stretches their musical boundaries beyond the signature sound that they are known for. Even if they succeed artistically at doing this, there's still a strong possibility that their fans will reject them regardless. And this would be because they're not giving them more of the same. The reason I love the last 4 songs in particular so much on this album are numerous, but mostly I loved hearing this band reaching out into new musical territory and succeeding in the process. After all, who doesn't want to hear a favorite band expand their sound and explore new sonic territories. Well, I guess Ozzy didn't. Those are my thoughts, but what are yours? I'm curious to know what you have to say about this album in the comments. This is TJR, and in a few moments, I'm going to be revealing the title of our next album. But first, if you like these videos, please hit like, hit subscribe, and hit the bell notification icon so you never miss a video. You can also support this channel by either leaving a one-time thanks or by becoming a patron supporter and making a monthly pledge. Patron supporters do receive exclusive videos not available on this channel. On our next episode, Elton John is going to release what he personally considers his best artistic achievement. And quite frankly, I have to agree. Next week, we're going to be talking about Captain Fantastic and the Brown Dirt Cowboy. This is TJR. Thank you so much for hanging out. I really appreciate it. And I'll look forward to hearing your comments on this album. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care. Bye-bye.